Today we're picking up with the Renaissance moves north. Italy, like I said, had recovered fairly quickly from the Black Death, and so that's why the Renaissance movement actually begins there. It's going to take Northern Europe just a little bit longer to recover to the same level that Italy does, and so it's about 100 years before they're actually able to catch up, and so it takes a little while before the Renaissance movement actually gets into the northern part of Europe. So after about the year 1450, the Renaissance begins to develop in those northern European countries. And among the major things of the Renaissance period is artwork, art, literature, music, and that kind of thing going on. And so we're going to see development of art, just like we did in Italy. And the artists that are going to be very famous at this time in the northern part are a couple of Flemish artists, and they included Jan and Hubert van Eyck. And these were a pair of brothers who were painters, very artistic family, and they portrayed in their paintings townspeople. They also portrayed religious scenes because religion was still a very important part of Northern European life. So it included very rich details, very active scenes of what was going on in townspeople's lives and what it was like to live in their area. But they also are important because they developed the oil-based paint. And this is important because oil-based paint is different than water-based. Obviously, it's oil-based versus water-based, kind of self-explanatory. Anyway, oil-based paint is awesome because it is able to hold very strong colors. It doesn't fade over time the way that water-based paints do. And so if you want to use vibrant blues and reds and yellows, oil-based paint is going to keep that a lot better than those other the water-based paints that fade. The surface also survives, like oil-based paint can survive because oil acts as a preservative, and so it survives a lot better and more intact for a lot of these paintings than water-based paints do. So that's why, especially in the Renaissance, we have a lot of paintings from the Renaissance that have survived over time, whereas prior to the Renaissance we don't have a whole lot because they chip away and they dry out and they fade and they discolor over the centuries, whereas the oil-based paint doesn't do that. The other major Flemish painter is a man named Peter Paul Rubens, and he also is going to take on this realistic tradition, but he blends it with the classical themes and the artistic freedom of the Italian Renaissance. So he's blending the Italian with the Flemish, and you get kind of a unique style from him. He's kind of important because his paintings were very, very large. They would take up whole walls of a home rather than, just a little kind of window sort of thing. It was an entire wall. So he made very large paintings, which is very time-consuming but also really expensive to do. Other northern humanists, remember humanism is where they're focusing on people and the thinking rather than so much the afterlife. So northern humanists are going to stress education. They felt education was very, very important. And they also want to revive the classical learning, just like the Italians were doing with reviving the Roman learning. But they also want to include those religious themes. They were much more concerned about religious themes than the Italians were during the Renaissance period. So we get a man named Desiderius Erasmus, who is Dutch, and he is going to create a new Greek edition of the New Testament. So he translates the New Testament into Greek, and he comes up with a better Latin translation of the New Testament. But he also is going to call for a translation of the Bible to be put in the vernacular, the common everyday language. So for him, that would be Dutch. He wanted people to be able to read it in their own language. He also is going to be a prolific writer in terms of writing his own material, not just translating. He writes a book called The Praise of Folly. And a folly is like a mistake or something that you do that's not intended. And so the praise of folly, the praise of mistakes or things that you don't intend, is a very humorous take on people's ignorant behavior or their immoral behavior, their mistakes that they make in life. So he's making fun of people's mistakes in order to learn lessons from it, basically. So he's writing about that, but he's also including in his book mistakes that the clergy makes and making fun of that. And so that doesn't go over quite so well with the church. But he also, in The Praise of Folly, he's going to teach that, an individual's chief duty as a person is to be open-minded and to have goodwill towards others, that you are willing to listen to the other side, that you're willing to negotiate and that kind of thing, that you don't get so strict in your mind that you can't see any other way, you can't see any other path. There's also a man named Sir Thomas More, and he is English, and he writes a book called Utopia. And Utopia, so not in his book, but in a utopia. Utopia is a place, like an ideal society that exists where everything is perfect and everything happens the way it should and everybody's fair and equal to each other. Well, he writes a book called Utopia, which is about how we get to that ideal society. How do we get it so that men and women can live together in peace and harmony? And so in his book, he talks about, well, the way to get there is to have no private property, that everybody owns everything collectively. It is not private to one person, that you don't own it yourself. You are willing to share. But he also says part of that is that we can't have people who are idle. We can't have people who are not working, who are not doing something, who are lazy. Everybody needs to have a purpose in life, and everybody needs to participate in making the society work. And so in order to do that, you need to be educated. And that we need to look at our justice system to make sure that things are fair and equal. And so he says that if we get a utopian society, we will get to a place where justice is used to end the crime rather than to eliminate the criminal. So he wants to get to a point where there's no society where people feel the need to steal, or the need to murder, or the need to kidnap, or anything like that, because everything else is perfect. That justice happens not to eliminate the individual who's committing the crime, but to eliminate the crime itself. That we get rid of the need to do that. So, kind of an interesting perspective. There are a lot of people writing literature as well in Northern Renaissance. Francois Rabelais is a French monk. He's also a physician and a scholar and an author, so your typical Renaissance guy. And he writes a book called Gargantua and Pantagruel. And Gargantua and Pantagruel are two gentle giants who are going out on this grand adventure. And so in this story, Rabelais is telling us this comic tale of their adventure, these two giants and what they encounter. And they are traveling and they get involved in a war. And so, like, on the surface, it's like this adventure book, but he has these undertones that he uses his characters in the book to express all kinds of different opinions on different things, like his opinion on what education should be, and his opinion on religion and government and taxes and all kinds of stuff. So there's kind of this unique undertone, like if you can read between the lines kind of thing to understand what he's saying. I mean, it's a great story to begin with, but then once you start realizing what he's actually saying or what the symbolism is, it's really very much a political writing as well. Another major literaturist, I don't even know if that's a word, another famous person who's writing literature, how about that, is William Shakespeare. And William Shakespeare was an English poet, he was an English playwright, and he, in his lifetime, wrote 37 plays, most of which are still performed today. So that speaks a lot to his impact or his greatness as a writer. He wrote all kinds of different he wasn't stuck in one genre. He wrote comedies, and he wrote history plays, and he wrote tragedies. So, like, his comedies included A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is about young people who are in love and then mistaken identity, and now they love this person and then this person, and it just is crazy. He wrote history plays like Richard III, and this was about the power struggles of the English kings. And he was writing that to please the English queen at the time, which was Elizabeth, because he wanted her to feel like her family line was important. He wanted her to feel the importance of her position as queen. He also wrote tragedies, and his tragedies are probably the best known. He wrote like Romeo and Juliet, Othello, Macbeth, Hamlet, all of these very great tragedies. But in these tragedies, he's talking about human beings who are being crushed by the powerful forces outside of them, like their families hate each other, or prejudices and that kind of thing, or just their own weakness, because sometimes it's their own weakness that is haunting them. Shakespeare is going to also enrich the English language. More than 1,700 words are going to appear for the first time in his plays, in his works. So words like bedroom or lonely, generous, being in a hurry, being a sneak, being heartsick. Those were all words that had never been written down in a play before. So they may have been used, we don't know, but the first time that it's actually published is in Shakespeare's works. And so, I mean, you think about that, they're words that we use all the time. They're not like they're oddball, weird things. They actually are words that we use quite frequently today. Another major writer is Miguel de Cervantes, and he is a Spanish writer, and he writes a book called Don Quixote. And Don Quixote is a story about Don Quixote, and he is a nobleman who is kind of stuck in this world of chivalry, which no longer exists in the Renaissance. It's not around. And so he gets stuck in his mind that he's a knight and he must go save the damsel in distress, and he just doesn't understand the world around him, and so he needs help from his servant. He's got a servant whose name is Sancho Panza, and Sancho Panza kind of is his practical guide and keeps him out of trouble and that kind of thing. But it's just a funny story of how this guy gets caught up in his past and in the chivalrous past that doesn't exist anymore. So it kind of makes fun of the age of the knights and that kind of thing, and how he gets out of it and everything. So with all of these works being produced, we are going to see a revolution in the printing industry. The development of printing is going to make literature much more accessible to the Europeans, that they are now able to purchase books and read them. The technology itself, paper making was around by 1300, and we got the idea of how to make paper from the Chinese. By the 1400s, the Germans had developed something called movable type. So you could have little blocks of letter that you put ink on, and you could move them next to each other to make words, and instead of actually handwriting it out. And so Johannes Gutenberg in 1456, he's going to use that movable type to print a complete edition of the Bible. And you could do it fairly easily and fairly cheaply, so it was very, very popular. People could finally read the Bible. And so eventually you get printing presses that are going to come about. And by the 1500s, these printing presses are going to turn out more than 20 million volumes of books, not just the Bible, but all kinds of books. And that's going to have a huge, huge impact on the population, because these books were cheap, they're easy to use. More people, because now you had access to books, are going to learn how to read and write so that they can write their own books and they can also read their own books. And these books are going to contain a broad range of knowledge, because pretty much any topic was written on. All kinds of topics are written on. And that's going to bring about new ideas as well, because people had ideas. They're like, I want to change this. Here's how I would change it. And so these new ideas are going to be what leads us into the Protestant Reformation. It's going to lead to religious turmoil, that there's going to be major changes happening in religion because people are now reading. So the power of the written word is very, very important. So our next video is going to be looking at the Protestant Reformation.